work. We're based here in DC. We have offices in Phoenix, New York, Maine, St. Louis, and Manchester, England. It's been a very active few weeks and few months for us, as I know it's been for you all. So it's nice to have this space just to come together and do some learning together. Molly Flores, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Molly Flores. I'm a project manager, and I'm specifically a project manager for this project. So it's been really fun getting to know all y'all and more about what you guys do.
And Corey?
Hi, everyone. I'm Corey Barenberg. I'm our Chief Operating Officer at Link, and it's been exciting to learn more about Easter Seals and the Veteran Staffing Network and to work with you on everything strategic communications, especially as I'll try to figure out this new landscape.
And Molly Barker?
Hi, everybody. I'm Molly Barker. I'm Link's editorial manager and digital strategist based out of Maine. And it's been just a delight giving this presentation earlier, and I'm sure it's going to be another good one today. I'm really excited.
And just so we're oriented to everyone else on the screen, I'm just going to read folks off in the way they appear on my screen. If you could do a quick introduction, we'll get started. Adam?
Hi, Adam Rock, a good friend of John's, and been, I guess, an advocate and a partner with the Easter Seals. And so I'm a retired colonel in the Army. I'm in the veteran space. That's what I do for a living, too. I'm a senior director over at Hiring Our Heroes, part of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So there's a direct correlation to what John and the Veteran Staffing Network do and what I do. I'm just also very, fond of what they've been doing for many, many years and been affiliated with them. So I guess I'm part of, John's advisory board or whatever he wants to call me. I help out however I can with John and his network, and it's reciprocal. So I'm here today to learn.
And I have to give Adam, he's like a top fan on our social media. So, so thank you for all the likes and shares.
Yes, ma'am.
Adam, feel free to jump in if we're getting anything wrong. You know these platforms.
No, you won't. This is all great stuff. Thank you.
John?
So I'm John Horwich. I'm the president and CEO of Easter Seals for DC, Maryland, Virginia, and I think everybody who's on this call knows me. So thank you for joining. I really appreciate your support and Link SP for doing this. And I hope that you'll find this something that's of value for you, both for your own professional success in addition to for your support of Easter Seals.
Thank you, John. Chanel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chanel. I am actually a manager at the Carlisle Group. We actually do a lot of partnerships with Easter Seals. I, in particular, work with the Bright Stars Committee, and I also try to advocate Carlisle to really engaging with the Veteran Staffing Program at Easter Seals, as well as working with the Little Warriors. I guess it's like the Child Development Centers at Easter Seals as well. Really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot from Link today.
Thank you, Chanel. And Jenny.
Hi, this is Jenny with Easter Seals Communications. I work with Amy, and I look forward to hearing this presentation.
Perfect. My 2-year-old Miles is just off screen building and knocking down a tower repeatedly and then racing cars into the blocks. So it looks like a tremendous amount of fun, but if you can't hear me, just wave and I'll make sure to speak up a little bit more. Let me screen share here a PowerPoint presentation. I can speak quite quickly in an attempt to keep this moving and get us through it. But if it's ever too much, just drop into the chat box and I will certainly slow down and make sure we unpack any points that are needed. So let me go into the slideshow view here. Can everyone see that okay? Excellent. Okay, so just this is what we're going to do today. I'll give you 30 seconds on who we are. We're going to talk about strategic communications in moments of crisis. You can define that as narrowly or as broadly as you want, but there's no question that we are now communicating in a landscape that is a much different landscape than the one we all normally communicate in. Talk a little bit about leadership and how that ties into thought leadership and social media expertise. We'll switch over to Molly to give some really specific lessons on LinkedIn. Some of those lessons will be way too specific for some of you, and some of them will be too vague for you. So we're trying to put a lot of stuff in here for kind of every different user level, and we'll be sure to stop and unpack that as much. And then we'll end with some tips and tricks for looking good on Zoom, which you all have mastered, and then we'll take any questions that folks have. We are recording this so it can be available to other board members. Just wanted to put that out there. So already talked about Link and the work we do. This is me, my son in the middle, my wife on the right. There's all my social media platforms. So if you want to follow me on any of those platforms, feel free to do so. This is Molly Barker, who's our Chief Digital Strategist, and her beautiful daughter, Emma, and her husband. Molly's joining us from Maine and will be digging in with us a little bit later. Some of the places we've done work over the last year or so. So I put this up here only to show that though we are very proudly a Washington, D.C. headquartered firm, we do work in urban and rural and the U.S. and beyond. And so a lot of what we're sharing is based on that experience of what's working in a variety of markets all at the same time. This is our team. Very proud of the team that we've built. We range in age from 17 through a great partnership with the Urban Alliance program that we've had for 8 years now. Our oldest employee is 92, a phenomenal guy named Charlie Brotman, who joins us by Zoom every week for our team meetings. We're about 50-50 male, female, and we're about 68% people of color at this point, which we're very, very proud of. This is just to make me feel better. We built a new office, very proudly built a new office in Washington, D.C. that we moved into on a Thursday. And then on a Friday, we sent everyone home to work remotely. And so we have not seen our new office in going on 3 months, and we probably won't for a while. So this is just cathartic for me to show someone that we have a new office, even though it'll sit there for a while longer. What has changed? And you know, the first time we were putting this presentation together for a group, we talked about what has changed post-coronavirus and COVID. It's evolved to what has changed in general. Without making anything I say today political in any way, we are living through a pandemic that is colliding with a recession, which is colliding with some of the largest discussions around equity that we've had as a country, or frankly haven't had as a country for a really long time. So everything is changing all at the same time. And from a communication standpoint, and from kind of the world we're communicating into, all of that matters for context. There's a lot of memes I could have picked for this one, but imagine a time traveler comes back and says, what year is it? Say 2020, that's probably the face everyone would make living through what 2020 has been so far. Of course, these are the pictures we all put up to make it look like we've got it all figured out, that we're using all this extra time to bake with our kids and everything is perfect. This is actually the reality. This was a day when I finally got my kid down for a nap after a morning where his mom and I were both on Zoom calls. He was on a daycare Zoom call, finally goes to sleep. I opened the window to get some fresh air, setting off the house alarm, which we forgot was on. He's now awake, and the rest of the afternoon, he was just coloring on the floor, not even on a board, just on the floor, and we were all okay with that, because that's the reality we're all truly living in right now. So what hasn't changed? What hasn't changed is the need for strategic communication, effective engagement, and authentic leadership. And I'm going to break those all down as they relate to board leadership and what we're communicating into the social media space. So when I talk about strategic communication, it's a nice consulting buzzword, but let's really break that down. The difference between communication and strategic communication is making sure that a call to action is attached to everything you're putting out. So if you think about anything that you're putting out, how does it answer these three questions? What, so what, and now what? What are we talking about? Why does that matter? And what specifically, as the consumer, do you want me to do with that information? This can apply to conversations. This can apply to social media posts. This can apply to emails or advertisements. Think about everything you're putting out there fitting into what, so what, now what. Just taking that moment of reflection to make sure a call to action is attached to it can dramatically increase performance and engagement and donor engagement, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes the communication can be really, really direct. This is some work we've been doing with Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs in DC. This, you know, what are we communicating? We're communicating that we want you to wait here. Why does that matter? Because the CDC says so. What do you want me to do with that information? I literally want you to wait here until the person in front of you moves, and then I want you to wait there. So sometimes it can be really direct. The other interesting thing here is making sure that even in moments of crisis, we're being as inclusive as possible in our language. The initial ask to us was to put together some labels that said stand here. But if you think about folks who might be in a wheelchair or have other limitations on their physical ability, standing is a word that leaves some people out. So waiting was a more inclusive word, and we want to make sure we're being direct but inclusive at the same time. in this crisis communication space, we can also be visionary. We have to be direct, but we can also be visionary and give people some hope, especially in a nonprofit world where you're trying to keep people engaged for what's next. This is some work we're doing for a city down in the panhandle of Texas called Brownsville. And so this was all about what their recovery planning was going to look like. So here's what our response is, here's what recovery looks like, and then here's what renewal looks like. And by adding in that renewal language at the end, this became aspirational and not just a crisis communications for the moment. And I think that's often important when we're communicating strategically. I'm throwing the word crisis communications around like everyone knows what that is. Crisis communication is often, oh my gosh, something has gone wrong. How do you help us fix it? I'm not using it in that sense. I'm using it as how are we communicating in moments of crisis when we have very cluttered communications landscapes and lots of prioritizing messages coming at us every day. How do we communicate into that? So the way we like to think about it with our clients is assess, respond, and act. The first step anytime you're putting something out in a cluttered environment is letting people know we're on top of this. We've got it. We're coming up with a plan. Responding becomes we're in this together. Here's your role. Here's our role. And then act means this isn't just about really pretty statements. It's about tying it directly into our action moving forward. And here's what that looks like. So this can generally apply to lots of different situations. Assess, respond, and act. When you're communicating, it's important to remember that very quickly, people get over the point of wanting to know you care about them. So every organization sent out the COVID-related "we care about you" email. And in the last 3 weeks, most organizations have sent out some sort of statement talking about how they embrace diversity, equity, inclusion. Those are good, but it's not enough. It's a first step, right? So yes, I'm glad you care about me. Now, what does that mean for clear action-oriented communication? And how are you sharing that across all of your communications channels? So it's not just, I'm communicating once and I'm done. It's an ongoing dialogue about the work that we're collectively doing in this space. This is a picture of Madonna before anyone gets worried that I accidentally dropped the wrong picture in here. There's a lot of work in the social media space that is kind of tone deaf at the moment, even with good intention behind it. This was a post Madonna put out very early in the COVID stuff. She put out this really odd video where she talked about how inspiring it's been to see that COVID has broken down barriers, and COVID doesn't see color and I don't see color, and so we're all in this together. And meanwhile, she's in a rose petal milk bath, literally with someone playing the guitar right off screen. It doesn't matter what the message is, you've missed the tone of the moment, and she got a lot of backlash, understandably, for that. Other side of the screen is a tweet put out by Steakum. You guys remember Steakum, those thin beef patties that our moms used to fry up for us? They put out this tweet that it's a beef company. They shouldn't be getting the moment, right? And yet they found a message that really resonated about really trusting where you get your information and digging in. Had nothing to do with their product, and it became one of the the most retweeted things out there in the early days of the COVID response. So regardless of your platform, really trying to make sure we're getting the message correct. Couple things that we're seeing since kind of the stay-at-home orders, et cetera. Engagement numbers are up across the board. That's probably not surprising to anyone. There are some things that have changed pretty dramatically. When people are accessing social media is changing. It used to be you'd see really big spikes in the morning, and at night, kind of the work hours, you saw less traction. With more and more people working from home, those are all out the window. So you're seeing very large spikes in social media usage in the late morning, the early afternoon, and really late at night. A lot of social media sites are seeing gigantic engagement between like 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. because everyone's sleeping less and more poorly than they were before this. So it's just a way of saying, don't get too caught up in like the algorithms of when to post and not to post, because they're kind of all out the window at this moment. Post when you have content and when it feels right. Live content is still getting higher engagement. So if you're putting out a panel discussion, instead of kind of pre-recording it and then putting it out there, is look at this dialogue we had a week ago. Anytime that engagement can be done live or broadcasted as a live event tends to get higher level of engagement still. It breaks through. Still important to have relevant content you're putting out there, but always be sure that the auto posting is controlled. And what I mean by that is a lot of organizations will kind of pre-populate their social media content and have it ready to go out on an automatic basis. We're in a media environment right now where what was relevant yesterday when you wrote it and got it approved may not be appropriate by the next morning, given the news cycles we're all living through right now. So making sure you know in any organization how to turn on and off the auto post if something no longer fits the moment. Switching gears a little bit into the media space, what is getting covered right now and what is not getting covered right now. We have been for the last decade in a breaking news cycle, which I have a whole nother presentation about how I think that's very unhealthy for democracy. But nonetheless, what breaks through is breaking news, very broadly defined. I think we can all remember the time that you were watching kind of network TV and the special report would come on and everyone would go to the TV because it was truly something that we all needed to look at once. Now the breaking news banners are on TV so many times every hour that it means almost nothing. Nothing is breaking news anymore because everything is breaking news. If we're in that landscape and reporters specifically are being asked to generate breaking news content, you get better coverage if you can fit it into whatever the breaking news of the day is. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Here are two examples because I think examples are always more illustrative than just a guy talking. We're doing some work with Farmers Restaurant Group. They own the founding farmers restaurants, farmers and distillers, farmers, fishers and bakers, and a distillery. Really hard to get any restaurant coverage to break through other than someone took a PPP loan that shouldn't have, or they didn't get it covered. That's what everyone was covering. To break through that, you needed to find an angle. So this restaurant group very quickly pivoted into a market and grocery angle. So they said, if we're not going to operate as a restaurant, let's open up grocery stores in our restaurants and figure out a way to get groceries to people who need them. That was meaningful and newsworthy, and it broke through. They then also decided that they were going to deliver those groceries to all 8 wards of DC. And when they couldn't find a delivery partner that was willing to deliver east of the Anacostia River, we worked with them to create maps, hire drivers from those communities, and be one of the first vendors that truly delivered to all 8 wards of Washington, DC. That again, met the moment, tapped into some dialogue, and got lots of coverage because it was kind of where the reporters were in their coverage at that moment. Other side of your screen is some work we've been doing for the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. It's a nonpartisan, bipartisan congressional committee that has been set up to honor the 100th anniversary of women fighting for and receiving the right to vote. In a normal environment, that'd be a really newsworthy thing. Really difficult to break through in this space, and they were really struggling to get their message out there. We went back and did some really good work with them around how the suffrage movement and the Spanish flu pandemic came together and were kind of mutually reinforcing. Because the Spanish flu took so many men out of the workforce, a lot of women stepped into the workforce. You combine that with World War I and everything else that's going on, and that's a pandemic story and a suffrage story that are directly linked. As soon as we made that connection, the New York Times wanted it, Time Magazine wanted it, etc. So those aren't the stories we would have told 3 months ago. They're absolutely the story we're telling today because they tie into the moment and still get their message out there. So think through the stories that you have to tell that may tie into the moment, even if they're a little bit disconnected. Where can we find and create those linkages? The last thing I'll say on the media piece, if you're working for a nonprofit or a for-profit, one of the biggest challenges is trying to wrap our heads around why certain things get covered and why certain things don't. Often groups like Easter Seals and Veteran Staffing Network, you're operating so much in the realm of good that it gets deeply frustrated that good doesn't get covered, right? Good news is the hardest thing to get covered. And so we've got to think about this in an ecosystem of visibility, which is if we can't rely on a news outlet to get it right, how do we create our own outlets to get it right? So sometimes that's paid content online. Sometimes that is earned stories and op-eds. Sometimes it's sharing them through your own content channels and hoping they get picked up elsewhere. That's an area where boards can be really important. How do the boards and their networks of influence echo a nonprofit's channel to give them additional validity? And then how do you take all of this stuff and put it through your websites and your blogs and your newsletters? Those together suddenly don't make you dependent on the media to tell your story any longer. It gives you lots of different channels that you can leverage to hopefully increase that visibility. That was a lot, so I'm going to give folks a moment to take a breath, myself included, and now we'll transition into engagement. So we talked about communications, let's move into engagement. We talked about what, so what, now what. The bottom chart here is what we call our continuum of engagement. Apply this to whatever world you come out of. How and why do people make decisions? Generally, human nature is that we go through a series of steps when we're going to decide what we're going to support. We generally have some awareness, then we move into understanding, interest, trial, buy-in, and then ultimately, if we get it right, people leave that engagement as advocates and ambassadors for your cause. So let's think about just Easter Seals broadly. I'm generally aware that there's something out there called Easter Seals. Okay, I'm understanding a little bit more about what they do. I'm interested in learning more, so I'm gonna click on their website or the social media post. Oh, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna volunteer some time, some resources. I am bought in. Awesome. Most engagement stops there, but engagement that's really done strategically and effectively takes that person who's already gotten themselves through the continuum and leaves them with content that they can share with their networks to make sure that you're kind of always reinforcing how many people are out there telling your story. So think about that kind of in the work that you're doing and we're doing together. The last piece of that is to make sure, and you know, none of you get this wrong, but to make sure that we understand that communications is not static and that it's not enough just to push out content and hope it lands. People are craving engagement. They want to get the content, be able to give you their feedback on it, ensure that they know you're listening so that the next time you communicate out, it continues to be relevant. So just constantly thinking about engagement and communications and social media as a cycle. This also takes a little bit of the pressure off to get it right every single time. Maybe you put up a post that didn't resonate. Awesome, learn from it and put out the next one that's a little bit better. And I think we're in a moment right now where that is really, really important. I'll give you one small example of that. We're working with a phenomenal nonprofit. It's a national youth development nonprofit. They do really, really great work. They put out a statement of solidarity with the Black community. They put out this Black Lives Matter statement, but they didn't get it right the first time. And they got a lot of feedback internally and from their staff that it was good, but it wasn't what it should have been. They put out a second statement. We got some feedback that it was getting closer, but not still there. They then put out a third statement that kind of got it right. We had a lot of discussion with them and their internal staff and their volunteers, and everyone made the determination that we would leave all three posts up to show what a learning, adapting organization looks like. So they left them up and each time said, here's what we understand we got wrong in that last post, and we're gonna get it right this time. It's a really interesting landscape to be in. And for their brand, that worked well because it showed that they were adaptable. But it's about listening, learning, and moving forward. This last part before I turn it over to Molly to really dig in on LinkedIn is thinking about the leadership space and the thought leadership space. This is really applicable to boards because often you're on boards because you're leaders in your own communities, your own industry, and providing some leadership support for the nonprofit. So what does authentic leadership look like specifically in moments of crisis? And how do you communicate that in a way through your social media channels that leads to engagement and donors and volunteers? So at Link, we came up with a really simple metric. It looked simple. It was done with lots of introspection. After kind of COVID hit, what was our priority going to be? And so we came up with, we're going to prioritize our people first, then our clients, then our communities. If we serve our team and our people, we have a better chance of serving our clients well. If we serve our clients well, our communities will be served really well, and then we can fill in the gaps. That seems really simple, but it was deeply clarifying to know in what order of priority we needed to make decisions around maintaining our summer internship program, maintaining the full-time job offers we'd made before this. How are we managing our money to first and foremost keep our team whole so that we're in best service to our clients moving forward? I won't go too deep into this one, but in our team, that's been a lot of things around like, where do we socialize? How do we have visual check-ins? How do we share so much more than we normally would have shared? We, every week at our team meeting, pull up the entire budget, all of our bank accounts, our cash flow in and out, and we go through line by line where we are versus the week before. I would have never done that before. People wouldn't have wanted that before. But I need people to understand that they don't just need to take my word for us managing this, they need to be part of that. This is relevant to nonprofits because a lot of donors are demanding more transparency than they've ever demanded. And if you do that the right way, it can be a really key part of communicating in this space. We're in this really interesting space where we're still at some level socially distanced, but we need more connection than ever. Groups like Easter Seals, groups like Veteran Staffing, you're filling this need really well. And often a little graphic, this is something I did on a whiteboard, took a picture of. It became one of our best performing posts at the beginning of all the COVID stuff because it found a visual way of representing a thought that we were then able to share through our various networks. This is a piece that the Washington Business Journal reached out and asked if I'd write a piece on what leadership looks like in challenging times. Came up with a paragraph, worked with my team on it. Again, it worked because an outside group asked for it. We turned it into a compelling visual. It became one of the biggest things we were able to share. It took a position without taking too much of a position, and it tapped into content that other people wanted to share on our behalf. By doing it that way and getting the traction, the Business Journal then came back to us and said, could you do a long form article on that? Could you go into kind of the tenets of leadership that seem to work? They then ran this, which then gave us an extra validation to put this back out through our channels in a way that gave us so much more visibility. So it started with a whiteboard thing that I shared. That became an invitation to come up with a paragraph on leadership that then became an invitation to put together an entire article that they shared through their networks. We got 3 bites of that apple simply by taking something we were doing internally and finding a way to find external validators that would allow us to share that. Let me transition to Molly here around social leadership in boards and what that can often look like in organizations. I'm going to use a couple examples from my social media. It's always safer to use your own instead of trying to put other people's stuff out there. I sit on 10 boards currently, and so give a lot of thought to how do I use my position to give glow to the organizations that I'm a part of and vice versa. Couple examples here of if you're promoting a board event, if you're on a board meeting, those types of things, how does even sharing that help give glow to the organization that you're a part of? One thing, and I put this one on here on the bottom left, I really hate when people take pictures of Zoom calls and then post them without telling people. Often they're catching people in their most unflattering moment. And I feel like without some warning, it can violate a bit of privacy. So this was a post I did where I just blurred out everyone's faces and still made the same content without getting anyone's privacy wrong. That type of stuff can work really well. Promoting your organization. So this is a piece that there's a group called Generation Hope, which does really, really great work about helping parents, often single parents with really small kids whose parents are going and getting their college education at the same time. Phenomenal organization. They've done something called Story Time. Every Tuesday night, they bring in a different community leader to read live on their Facebook account to a bunch of kids. It was awesome. My son and I did it last Tuesday. I'm mentioning this because the event was great. They put it together. They raised a whole bunch of money off it. But where we got the most traction for it is when I was able to put out some content in the week leading up to it that tagged every other person who'd read a book and said, you guys have all done this. Leon Harris, Soledad O'Brien, a couple of Congress people. What is your best advice for my son and I as we do this? So we created this whole social media dialogue around the event that had nothing to do with the actual event, but also gave a lot of extra glow to the organization. So think about those types of things when we're putting this type of stuff out. And then last but not least, and I'll end here and turn it over to Molly, how can we promote partnerships? In this moment, people want content, but they want that content to be really tied into other work. So this is a post around GW Hospital and a client we did some work with called Enchant that built a big holiday light display at Nats Park last year. They're not going to be doing that this year, but they have all these holiday decorations that they went and installed at local hospitals to bring some joy in this moment. That type of post gets a lot of traction because it's got a hospital, a private event provider, and a feel-good story all in one. So just think about the types of partnerships that you might be able to bring in from other parts of your life that say, I'm so proud of my work on Easter seals, and it ties in directly to this work I'm doing in another part of my life. Tag both of them in a post, and suddenly all those organizations are getting some extra glow simply from your position as a board member working with both of them. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Molly to walk us through LinkedIn. Molly, it is all yours.
Oh, okay. Actually, if you want to stop screen sharing, Michael, I'll go ahead and start sharing my own.
There you go.
So here we go.
Hi, David.
Sorry I was late. I had a flat tire on the way back from the doctor's office. My apologies.
Oh goodness. Glad you're here.
And bouncing around. My dog has decided to become my desk.
I love that.
Hey, Michael, this is Adam. Can we ask questions, or should you want us to wait to the end?
No, absolutely. We can do a couple here, or drop them in the chat box, and then we'll go on from there. So go ahead.
It's up to you. It's a small group, but so maybe I just ask this one. I just go back to your analogy of the breaking news, and I chuckled at it because that's so right. As I watch the TV screens, everything's breaking news. I'm asking you from your experience in communications. You know, if you post so much that every day, I don't know, what do you think is the appropriate battle rhythm or frequency that somebody trying to make a point in our space specifically, how often should we post and what platforms? Because I would like my post to be impactful, and most about like it's almost, I like the breaking news. If Adam or David or Jonathan post something, it's because it's really important to them and it's breaking news. But how often should we do that?
That is a phenomenal question and previews a lot of what Molly's going to go into. So it's almost like we planned that, Adam. That was great. Let me give a general overview, and then
I
Molly's
take
going
checks, Molly.
to get into some of the specifics. The best content to put out there is content that is relevant and doesn't feel forced. So if you don't have content to share on every platform every day, don't
Right.
share it. Your engagement will
Okay.
go down, and Molly can get into the numbers around that.
Right.
If it's super relevant, put it out there. There are some platforms that actually, through their algorithm, discourage overposting, and Molly will walk through that. Facebook is at the
Good.
top of that list. The rules apply differently to personal accounts and business accounts. So often you can post as much as you want personally, and it's not going to change your algorithm. But if you do it on a business page, like the official Easter Seals page, etc., that will affect where you show up on other people's feeds. So we'll walk through all that in a little bit, but it's most important that what is out there feels very relevant in that moment, and that it feels personal to your brand and why you would be saying something on this topic at this moment. Those are the things that tend to really get a lot more traction.
Thanks,
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
The other thing that I would put out there is the challenge with everything social media is everything seems to need to be super relevant and super fresh and super new on a timeline that doesn't allow for any actual consideration for what the content should be. So think about not just waking up in the morning and thinking, what do we need to put out today? But
Right.
what did we put out a year ago that with the appropriate context is even more valid today? So really going back to some of those posts you might have done in the past that have gotten good traction, and think about how do we dust them off and say, literally, I posted this a year ago. And this morning when I looked at the news, I realized this is more relevant today than it's ever been, so I'm resharing it here. Kind of recycling and upcycling some of that content tends to even get a better bite the second time around.
Excellent. Thank you.
Molly, all yours.
All right, thanks, Michael. Yeah, great questions, Adam. And yet we're going to get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts around how the algorithms work and what makes LinkedIn's algorithm very unique from other social media platforms. So, before I get started, digging in really deeply on LinkedIn, first want to mention that we're going to focus on personal profiles. We could do a whole separate presentation on best practices for company profiles. And the reason that we're focusing on the personal profiles is because people want to engage with other people more so than brands. Does that mean that people don't engage with brands? Absolutely not. But it's also, I think, most relevant for your purposes here as ambassadors for the Veteran Services Network. And then one more quick overarching point I'd like to make before we get into the real specifics. So we all know, or at least I think we all know, LinkedIn is the professional social media network. Now, does that mean we shouldn't be personal or human on LinkedIn? Absolutely not. And we'll touch on some more specifics around that. But I just kind of wanted to put that out there first and foremost. So let's get going. Just a couple of high-level stats. I won't spend a lot of time on this. I think we understand how powerful LinkedIn is. That's why we are asked to dig in specifically on this platform. 657 million monthly users. That number keeps growing year over year. There are 30 million companies with profiles on the platform, 154 million people in the US. And this is fascinating. More than 50% of Americans who hold college degrees, more specifically 51%, are users. And engagement on the platform keeps increasing by about 50% year over year. So let's say you have a B2B website or a blog. 50% of the traffic from social media to your website or blog is going to come from LinkedIn. And at least 50% of decision makers spend an hour a week consuming thought leadership. Often they source that content from LinkedIn. So some profile tips and tricks and do's and don'ts here. A few things that aren't up here on the screen, some big picture stuff. you have several fields in your profile that you can utilize. Leverage each and every one of them. Your headline should be exactly that. It should be the headline to your professional story. You have a separate field for your job title. That's where your job title belongs. So use that headline to really tell people who you are and you know what you do. Make sure all your information is up to date. Profile photo. You know, if you are a ski instructor, it makes sense for your profile photo to be of you on a chairlift or at the top of a ski mountain. If you're not a ski instructor, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So good resolution, high quality professional headshot. There's a skills section that you can use, and people can endorse you for skills, or you can add your own skills. Make sure your skills are up to date, because that's one of the ways that people can find you on the platform. About 63 million people a month access the platform on mobile, so make sure your profile looks good on mobile. And then finally, for like the big picture stuff, make sure you don't have any typos, grammar is good, punctuation is good. You know, while this shouldn't be like the online version of your resume per se, you know, that it does give a lot of folks a first impression of who you are as a professional. So making sure it's flawless is really important. Now that we've gotten the kind of the big picture stuff out of the way, there's a few kind of insider tips and tricks that can really help optimize your profile and put it to that next level. So you can create a vanity URL, and that is something that I would strongly consider doing. It will help people find you better, for one, and it looks cleaner. So if you want to include your LinkedIn profile on some of your other social platforms, on your website, whatever the case may be, that will go a long way. Again, people, well, actually, I did this the last time I said again, and I hadn't touched on it yet. People are more likely to follow you than to connect with you, especially second or third degree connections you may have. There's an option to change your call to action button to follow instead of to connect. That can only be done through the mobile application. So I'm not going to walk us through how to do that right now, or how to create that vanity URL, but we can send around some tutorials about how to do those things after the presentation. Another thing is make sure you're using keywords in your profile. They again will help people find you. A great place to source those keywords could be from your current job description if you're not searching for a job currently, or if you are searching for a job, words that frequently pop up in the words in the job descriptions in your industry. Again, be personal, be human. Using an anecdote to describe how your career got started or how you are progressing along your career path can go a long way and really lets people see the human being behind the professional. And then don't use jargon or buzzwords in your profile. They are really one of the biggest barriers to effective communication. All right, now let's talk about posts. Again, we'll start with big picture and then we'll go down to the nitty gritty. Posts should clearly communicate your brand story and value. Another thing that will bolster engagement on LinkedIn is providing value. One way of doing that is offering some quick tips. The tips shouldn't be too basic. You don't want readers to be like, well, I knew that. Why are you posting about this? Or too complex. They really should be digestible and actionable. And offer insight on timely topics. This goes back to what Michael was saying earlier. Posts that are timely are going to resonate much more than posts that aren't. We're going to talk about the algorithm really quickly here. and why and how it works on LinkedIn. And then we'll go in and I will create a sample post that kind of shows how all of this comes together. So as Michael mentioned, every social media platform has its own algorithm, and those algorithms are what decides what posts are prioritized over others. I'm going to say it, just step back really quickly. This is everything that's up on my screen is what the research shows. This might not feel right to everybody. So if this doesn't feel right to you, we're giving you the information, but ultimately when it comes to social media, you need to communicate in a style that's comfortable and feels right to you. So LinkedIn is interesting because it rewards users who post once to twice a day. And that seems like a lot, but it doesn't have to be original content every time. You can curate content from other sources, or you can dust off old posts like Michael suggested earlier. Another fascinating thing about how LinkedIn's algorithm works is that it rewards text-only posts and posts that don't include URLs in the text of the post. So, and then finally, use some hashtags, make sure they're relevant, no more than 5 to 6 per post. So why is that? Okay, we got Grumpy Cat down here wearing a big no hat. The reason we've got Grumpy Cat down here wearing a big no hat is my colleague Corey, who's on this call with us today, eloquently put it the other day that LinkedIn does not want to become the trash heap of memes and GIFs that Facebook has become. I couldn't agree with that more. That's not the place for it. So thus the no images with the text only posts. It's really interesting with the URLs. You can use URLs, and if you are going to use URLs, put them in the first comment following the post. LinkedIn penalizes URLs in the post itself because the URLs drive traffic away from the platform, meaning users are spending less time on their platform. And they want people spending as much time on the platform as possible. Just checking my notes really quickly to make sure I'm not forgetting anything here. And the other thing about the text-only post is LinkedIn really rewards original content. So with all that being said, let me get out of here really quickly, and we'll go ahead and do a quick sample post. Oops, sorry.
So in our presentation on Monday, we got some feedback that it would be really helpful to actually just open up LinkedIn and show an example of this. So I know we've only got about 12 minutes left, so we're going to do that now, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, so I'm going to try to wrap all those pieces of advice I gave you into one quick post here.
And while she's doing that, we got a good question about knowing which hashtag to use. Some social media platforms will tell you how many other people have used that hashtag. So like COVID versus COVID-19, some groups are just using both of them. Some of them are using the one that has the biggest number of followers. We've tended to use COVID-19 because we're doing so much work with clients who are in that medical space. It's been important to kind of be technically right. But COVID as a standalone is getting a much higher level of traction. So it's good to look at those numbers and figure it out from there. And we can show you how to do that. Does that help, John? Perfect.
It's also important when you're looking at hashtags that could potentially have like a hyphen, like what you used there, John, to see what's trending, because the hyphen will impact things. So I think COVID-19 without the dash trends higher than COVID with the dash, but COVID overall trends higher generally.
So there's our post, and I'm not going to actually post this right now, but if I were to, then I would say, reach out to me or link strategic partners to find out how our URL is also in the first comment, and then I would link to the first comment. So that That's it. So now you see how to link. There were questions, or how to tag. There were questions about how to tag people in the last presentation. There were questions about how to add hashtags. And LinkedIn is really great because it will give you suggestions for hashtags to use right in the platform. So, all right, we are running out of time, so I'm going to try to be really, I'm going to talk really quickly here. Other tips: be concise. As a writer and editor, brevity is always best. I can't underscore that enough. Tag other users. We just talked about that. There's an option to start a poll. Asking people questions or asking their opinions is a great people to get people to engage. Share a personal experience and relate it to your professional experience. Ask questions like the question that's being asked here, and pay attention to formatting. Formatting is important, especially in text-only posts. Nobody wants to read a wall of text. You can insert emojis. You can break it up with paragraph breaks. And I'm just going to quickly go over the thought leadership piece. Michael touched a lot on thought leadership already. So when it comes to thought leadership on LinkedIn, 55% of decision makers use thought leadership pieces to vet capabilities and decide who they want to do business with. So it's important to do it well. And if it isn't done well, it can have the opposite effect. It can take you out of the running for those business opportunities. Really quickly, again, timely, relevant, and most importantly, offer a unique perspective. Consider the challenges facing your network and write to those. Do you have a solution to offer? And then you can create cross-promotional content with other thought leaders, co-author a piece, and tag each other in the post, and you'll get the benefit of access to each other's networks. Then bringing it all back home to what Michael said about strategic communications, any thought leadership pieces really should answer that what, so what, now what, and move people from that, along that engagement continuum from advocacy to advocacy rather. Thought leadership: don't repeat what everyone else is saying, and don't pitch or sell yourself. And now just a couple of disclaimers about that. Thought leadership on LinkedIn should pitch an idea or a solution. So in the nonprofit space, that's often what people are offering, are solutions to problems and ways to help people. That's the exception to that. But when it comes to your personal profiles, don't pitch your company actively in a thought leadership piece. Don't pitch yourself or your skills or your abilities actively in a thought leadership piece. Couple more quick things. Video, yes, video is good. I know I talked about text-only posts. If you want to use video, keep it as short as you can. 90 seconds is the upward limit. Somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds is the optimal length. People just don't have long attention spans these days. Use native video, and what I mean by that is upload the video directly to the platform. Don't link to the video from YouTube or wherever else the video may be hosted, and use the captioning feature. Most people don't watch the video on with the sound on the first time. You know, back in the pre-COVID world, let's say you're sneaking in 5 minutes where you really shouldn't be, and you're watching a video on LinkedIn and you don't want your boss to know. That's where the captioning comes in. Leverage influencers, tag influencers in posts, ask them questions, ask them their opinions. There's a whole realm of ways that we can do that. Join groups to build your network that will give you direct access to people in that group without directly connecting to them. And then mine your second and third degree connections to build your network. And if you decide to send a connection request to someone that you think makes sense to do so, don't use a standard connection request that LinkedIn gives you. Personalize it. That is the start of your professional relationship with that person, and first impressions matter. Now, tying it all back, what does this mean to, as a board member or as a staff member for Easter Seals? Amplify. If the Veteran Staffing Network is putting out something that strongly resonates with you, share it and add your own thoughts to it. On the flip side of that, your own original thoughts about why it's important to support the organization, and then tagging both Easter Seals and the Veteran Staffing Network in the posts will amplify that and will really resonate with people. And that is it on LinkedIn. And now I'm going to turn it back to Michael really quickly to.
You guys all get this right. So just go to that next slide, Molly, and we'll wrap here. But if you're on a lot of Zoom calls, find natural light if you can. Put the light in front of you. It works the best. So Molly Flores, I'm going to call out as a bad example of how to get the lighting right. With we had that set up for this example. I got my lighting in front of me here, and it works a little bit better. Make sure you're always eye level. It makes your listeners feel like you're connecting with them and not looking down or up on them. This is the one that most people really enjoy the most. If you go to the video thing on Zoom on the very bottom, there's a little up arrow. When you open it and go into video settings, there's a checkbox that says touch up my appearance, and you can turn on or off your HD camera. So depending on the level of sleep you got before your morning thing, click that box on and suddenly you look fresh and ready to go again. I think everyone on this call knows this, but like we saw earlier, letting your kids and your pets come into the screen makes it human. Zoom bombing, not great. So make sure you have your security settings set up so no one's jumping into your call accidentally. Mute yourself. And then if you're doing any media, and this is especially like if you're a CEO or you're doing media often, we really like to have our clients put a Post-it note with their 3 main points next to their camera. So that way, when you're looking directly at the camera and being engaged, you have your key messaging there and you don't have to keep looking off screen. But as I said, you guys all get that right. So we're going to stop now. We'll put up our contact information for you have it, and we'll turn off the slide deck so that we can go back to seeing each other, and we'll take any questions that folks have and know that we're available if anything else is helpful. I got a couple of things in here from David about thought leadership. Should it be written from a personal perspective, a sanitized corporate voice, or a blend of both? The most effective engagement are the ones that feel personal versus the ones that feel highly sanitized. But often the statements that are going out have come from kind of a more corporate voice. So if you can share those and then add your own personal thoughts on them, that tends to get some really good engagement levels. Are there any other questions that we didn't get to? Was that helpful? Perfect. I know it's a lot of stuff to go over all at once, and there are no perfect answers in any of this, but the more that we're trying to get it right, we find really, really good engagement there. The other thing that is weird is anytime you kind of declare yourself a thought leader, it's one of those things like, if you declare you're trying to get it right, are you getting it more right or not? So thought leadership is one of those things that is just out there as a concept. And sometimes I think it's a helpful concept and sometimes I don't. But it generally means, what are we doing to contribute a voice that needs to be contributed to this topic in a way that other people can come along with? If the goal is to make it shareable and to get other people to take your position and send it out into their networks, think about the graphic that goes with it. Think about less I statements and more we statements. So if it's, I believe this, I've done this, people will read it and be like, that's fantastic, but they may not share it because it doesn't line up with theirs. If you can say like, I've learned in my experience, the more that we can do this and the more that we can do this, that is content that other people are like, oh, I want to share that with my network. It applies here. So thinking about some of that makes things a little bit more shareable as well.
Yeah.
John, just to dig in a quick second on your question again around hashtags. If you go to Twitter on your desktop, well, actually, it's probably on your mobile device too, but I've never looked at it on mobile. There's a tab called #Explore, and that tab shows you what's trending for the day. It's pretty helpful to see, what are the hashtags that are really starting a conversation today. And then more generally, of course, there are sort of consistent hashtags that might not be trending, but might be used by organizations that are in your space or people who you follow, or people who follow you who also follow others. And it's sometimes helpful to just kind of do a quick scan of those accounts that you think are most relevant to see what they're using as well.
I'm sorry, did you say on Twitter under Explore?
Yeah, so I know where it is on the desktop. That's usually
Right, I'm on the desktop, and then under trending, did you say?
Yeah, #Explore, and then there's right now there's COVID-19, then there's trending. So that trending tab has everything that's sort of trending right now, and then you can look at it under different segments like sports and news and entertainment and fun, that sort of thing.
I gotcha. Okay. So there's nothing in LinkedIn that says, like veterans or military families or whatever that would tell you like that's a good one or a bad one.
I'm not sure about LinkedIn. I usually just use Twitter as sort of my standard to get what's trending. Molly, do you know if LinkedIn has a way that they aggregate hashtags that are being used?
I don't for sure, but I do know that when you're writing a post on LinkedIn, it'll suggest hashtags for you based off of the words in your post.
Okay.
You can also filter things, of course, by hashtag in LinkedIn, and you can follow particular hashtags.
Yeah.
So as you get a sense of what other people in your network are using, it might be helpful to throw those hashtags into your consistent filter, so you can look at those. That's on your on LinkedIn on desktop. Again, that's on your dashboard on the left hand side. It says followed hashtags, and you can add using that.
I'd also say look at the hashtags that your competitors are using. It's okay to steal sometimes.
Yep.
Borrow.
Exactly. Thank you, Michael.
Absolutely.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Absolutely.
Hey, Adam here. I was just going to make one comment. A great job, and I'm sure David Muir knows this because he's really smart. And but LinkedIn Premium is free for veterans for a year and military spouses. So that the audience that David and I are advocating for, the VSN and Armor Heroes, we probably both promote that. But that'd be good for you to know, because that expands the capabilities that you have on the platform.
Yeah, it greatly expands it. And it also I believe you get 5 inbox message credits a month with that, which otherwise like one inbox message would cost you 1 credit for one inbox message would cost you $10, which is unreal. So yeah, that's really good to know. I didn't realize that was free for veterans for a year. That's awesome.
And I just signed up for the free trial of their Sales Navigator tool, which is incredibly impressive, the way that you can slice and dice the data and see the connections that you have. So I'm still playing with it, but it's pretty amazing.
It's really powerful, and I'm glad you signed up for that, or at least for the trial for that, because I think as for being a communicator, I'm having a tough time communicating right now. It's incredibly powerful. That's all. I'll leave it at that.
How often should we post thought leadership articles? Because I'm starting to write some. I've got one over to Amy. I've got a couple more I'm going to be sending over to her for viewpoints. Maybe even one I can break down into a series.
Yeah.
But what's the right length? 400 to 600 words, something like that, probably. And how often do you put a thought leadership article up versus a post?
So putting up posts you can do kind of as frequently as makes sense for your platform that doesn't trigger an algorithm. For a thought leadership piece, we have found that sometimes they need a little bit more room to breathe and gain traction. So you can put it out, and then over the next week, it starts to build, as opposed to like, if it doesn't get likes immediately, it hasn't worked. It's like, no, put it out on all of your platforms. But the important thing is to make sure it all drives people to wherever the original content works. So if you're writing a 400 to 600 page piece, it's got to live somewhere, like on a blog or a website or a post somewhere that you're driving everyone else to. It lets you kind of get your metrics from that in a really helpful way. Mm-hmm. And then think about, you put it out on a Tuesday. What then goes out on Wednesday? Who retweets it on Thursday to try and keep it alive? So if I've written a piece, I'll put it out, give it a day to see how it does. And then Link will go in and retweet that or share it through their stuff 2 days later to give it another chance at getting up in people's news feeds. Right. And then if it's someone I've co-authored it with, we ask them to do that a day later. And then a day after that, their organization, right? So now you've had 4 different shares of the same content, but with a little bit of strategy behind it.
So with my personal network, I'm connected directly to almost 22,000 people.
Yep.
I was an early adopter, and I did not follow LinkedIn's guidelines. I just connected with everybody. So would it make sense for me to post it on my profile first, and then have the VSN LinkedIn page tweet it or repost or whatever, and then we have John do it, and kind of like that, a strategic roll across.
Absolutely. And I would not do that all at the same time, right? I would put yours out, have someone share it the next day, have someone share it the next day. That
Right.
way, every day you've got a better chance of more eyeballs seeing it as fresh content.
Okay.
It's almost kind of a week of rollout around that. That also works, Adam, for veterans, generally speaking. In addition to getting folks who you're working with to just feel comfortable sharing content, the counterpoint to that strategy is, what can we put together that people who want to can share on your behalf? That often gets even better traction. So if I put out an Easter Seals post that Easter Seals doesn't put out, but it's kind of using a graphic that you guys have given me, that's going to get more shared through my network because it comes from me. So we can also think about, like, what type of content could we put out there that says, you really want to help in this moment. One of the things you could do is share this graphic with your own content and we'll repost it. So looking at it almost as a reverse sometimes works really well. Is that helpful?
Very much.
Perfect. Well, we'll make this recording available. We'll send the slide deck over if that's helpful, and then we